Hello, everyone. I must confess, I've never had the opportunity to speak for an hour just about my own stuff. So it was new territory, but we'll see how we go. I purposely put a whole load of slides towards the end that I can whiz through if. Okay. So, dying as a social event with a medical component, not a medical event with a social. So, just quickly for the people who don't know me, I'm a psychologist, that's my bias. My master's was in the psychology of music, nothing to do with health. My wife is here. When I first came up to be at UEA in 2009, I started as an honorary fellow. My PhD was in aviation, all right, nothing to do with health and human factors, but it did have an overlap when it came to safety. I have a family connection to end-of-life care. My grandmother was head matron in Lancaster General Hospital, and when she was a single mum and couldn't carry on that job, she needed obviously to find work, and she rented a flat off a local GP surgery in the Morecambe area. And she took referrals for women who were known to be dying. So my mum grew up with 2 or 3 women dying in the house the whole time. So that was like in the 1950s. First hospice was set up in southeast London, St. Christopher's, in 1967. I mention that because it's just one generation when things have changed so dramatically, right? Volunteers of Butterfly in the north of Norwich. If you don't know that charity, it's amazing. Their strapline is "No one should die alone," and you just sit with people again who are known to be dying. And also, I volunteer for the MS Society. I do sometimes have wobbles in my speech. I have secondary progressive, but that's long in the history. Also, trained as an end-of-life doula. One good thing that UEA did for me enabled me to do this on CPD, right? What's a doula? Takes care of all non-clinical elements of dying, and the supporting families. And as you hopefully find out by the end of this talk, the vast majority of things to do with dying are non-clinical. And I've led the community for the Palliative and End-of-Life Care Board in Norfolk and Wales since 2017. Very little money. It's a voluntary role, but we try. Okay. Anyone familiar with this guy? Yossa. All right. This was me starting at UEA. I could do that. It's a job. And just went from short-term contract to short-term contract until finally they gave me a job. I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of things that I'm proud of. This won a research award, and that was in the BMJ. And then I wrote my favourite box ever, you Loke, the adverse effects chapter for the Cochrane Manual. Worked with Caitlin on a great publication, Master Psychiatry. And this one, I mentioned this one. So on the back of the OX study, which was the largest study to be conducted in care homes at the time, showed neutral findings. I was really conscious that we'd sent a message to commissioners, don't commission OT to care homes, it doesn't work. But that's not actually what the study suggested. If you looked at the process evaluation, it just showed that we were asking the wrong questions in the wrong kind of way. So this bottom one, despite being a systematic review, and I know systematic reviews are pretty tedious, it was one of the first to do a systematic review just of process evaluations. And they used Tony Arthur's great title for a paper, Did the Trial Kill the Intervention? I tracked £10.5 million worth of NIHR money that had gone into care homes, all showed neutral findings. And the process evaluation said basically, we didn't co-design with the staff. So the main thing from that is this idea of procedural trigger. An RC starts, the energy's high, people are enthusiastic. Over time, by the time it gets to your primary endpoint, are you actually delivering and testing the intervention that you design? By and large, no. All right? And yet, you still go to an NIHR funding body. Where's the RCT? Where's the RCT? Where's the RCT? We're in a transitional space and time, but the fact is we are, in my opinion, wasting time and money. Where am I going? I'm going to work at hospice, right? Because for me, that has a closer association to actually implementing change. So, a broad question. big fan of Illich's comments, is the capacity to cope with the human reality of death, pain, and sickness. In every society, the image of death is the culturally conditioned anticipation of an uncertain death. And this anticipation determines a series of behavioral norms. So, I've got a question for you. What do you think our behavioral norms are when it comes to end of life or end-of-life care conversations? Anyway.
We don't talk about it. Shut them.
We'll just pretend it won't go away. I mean, pretend it will go away, but ultimately it won't. Through sitting with people who are dying in the hospital and engaging with their family, there's one memory that really strikes a chord with me. I went up to the front desk of the ward and I said, look, I'm here to see this lady. I understand she's in the side room. And they said, sorry, sadly, she's just died. Right? So I said, when was it? It's about 10 minutes ago. I said, are the family still here? They said, yes, they're in the family room. So I went in, I introduced myself, asked if they needed anything. First question, what happens now? I was struck by it. Yeah, we don't know. I've got 4 kids. My wife is here. You know, we've had 4 opportunities for NCT class. 4 opportunities to prepare for what we know is going to happen. And yet we know that there's a lot, life expectancy is a lot longer, but healthy life expectancy is not. We know it's going to happen. And yet we don't prepare the public. Why? Well, understandably, thinking about dying can be upsetting, so we avoid it. Now, in my training in CBT, if you turn up, present yourself to a psychologist with an avoidant or a phobia, an avoidant behavior, what's their first line of treatment? Exposure. Yeah? Trying to understand that what you're worried about, generally the worst thing won't happen. So you can't stop it. So here's one. He's an existential psychologist. Anxiety stems from the fear of oblivion. And going back into the history books, the state of nothingness after death is identical to the state of it before birth. Are you stressed about that? No. Right? So why are we stressed about that? Okay. A great book, by the way, Selden Shalom, and he talks really eloquently about this. But he would suggest that kind of fear of death is very much present in what we buy, who we vote for, and it can be, tracks across all elements of our life. And incidentally, he's one of the co-authors on the Lancet Commission that I'll introduce in a minute. So, this quote came from Professor Ali Kelleher. Kindly, he's been my mentor for a number of years now. He came to UEA because I got into palliative care because in that HOP study that I mentioned, 300 and about a third of participants died within the 1-year observational period. So I asked the question, for those half care home residents that were in the control arm, what did they get? Nothing. Right? I got nothing. So I was inspired to was look into this more, and I think I had that light bulb moment that actually I'm dedicating the rest of my working life to palliative and end-of-life care. And it was one of those ones where I've got a few £1,000 at most to post this conference, and UEA event team weren't particularly helpful. And I was there, and I was scared at the time that we weren't going to have enough sandwiches because it was a packed house. Literally, I expected about 50 people. It was 350 people, and they were queued out the door. And you think to yourself, hold on a second. This idea that death is a taboo, I challenge that. We just don't have the platforms and the opportunities to discuss this stuff. Actually, in my experience, in fact, there's a great study done with the Academy of Medical Sciences, and they managed to fund an intervention where they took over a shop in Lewisham Shopping Centre, and it was called the Departure Lounge. And they dressed it up to they did look as though that they were selling things like suitcases and all things to do with travel. But when he went in there, the shop assistants were actually research assistants, and they were there to try and engage in end-of-life care conversation. Their experience, people came in, because on the side of the suitcases were lots of sort of death statistics, and why you should think about planning ahead. A lot of people came in, read it, did a massive U-turn, swerved, only to come back and go, actually, I do have a few questions. And the research assistant said it's the kind of a previous moment, suddenly there was like encouraging people to leave, right? They couldn't shut them up. So suffice to say that I think that we are naturally inquisitive, but we don't have the opportunities. So this is the findings from the Lancet Commission published in 2022. Dying is overtreated in many parts of the world. And if we think about over in America, whereas obviously you have to pay for healthcare, there's incentives to actually carry on treatment. But in some ways it's overtreatment, but at the same time, it also remains remarkably undertreated in other parts of the world. Undertreated for preventable conditions, and things like India, which produce the lion's share of the world's morphine, many states of India, Italy. So what does this paint? It paints an unbalanced and contradictory picture. So just quickly, I'm going to whistle through. Has anyone heard of Marshall Gantz? I'd really encourage you. He's a really entertaining guy. Had one of these sorts of, not particularly glamorous starts, but now he's a Harvard professor. And his main theme is around designing and coming up with public narratives where they're trying to encourage the public to change something. And end-of-life care is certainly one of those. So he works with this triptych of a story that is meant to be engaging. I'll try it. It has these three components. Why me? Why us? And why now? We'll talk about the 95% rule. Why end-of-life care and palliative end-of-life care is especially a public health issue. We'll talk about this idea of death literacy. I think in this room we'll all be familiar with the term health literacy, but also want to introduce this idea of death literacy. We'll think about compassionate communities, and then this is one thing I will rattle through to make sure this last slide is embedded in your consciousness. It's about what you can do to make it easier for the people you love when it's your time. So, this is Marshall Gantz's approach. As you can see, has a link between why me in relation to why now, my personal, let's say, meaning and purpose. Why am I doing this? And then why me in relation to us? This would be the community element. And then ultimately, the community in relation to now is the urgency. So we'll start off with why me. We'll do a case study of my wife's father and my father-in-law, who died in September 22. Yep. Literally, it was his anniversary last Saturday. So 85, so he'd had 6 heart attacks, and we honestly thought it would be his heart that would get him. And he'd had that classic state of what in the literature you read sometimes, progressive dwindling. Yeah. So deterioration going longer and shallower over many years. It had 3 admissions, but then there was a time where I saw a step change. And this is where I'm so grateful for someone who is an assistant professor in the medical school of palliative care consultant at Norfolk and Norwich. I said, what do I do? And they said that first off, GPs are task focused. What you need to do, get them to phone up and ask for an out-of-hours palliative care assessment. That was the best piece of advice anyone could ever give us. And yet, it's not in the public domain. So when they did have an assessment, he was admitted due to dehydration. And then they found metastatic cancer. All right? And then was discharged home 12 days later, despite the fact that we didn't get the results of the scan until like 4 days after, because of August bank holiday, of course, right? He died home on the 20th. So what we can see is a rapid deterioration. But this is the experience for us, right? It was like changing train tracks. Suddenly, you're on a completely different trajectory, you're with a different team, and a whole bundle more of uncertainty. So because he wanted to be cared for at home, then the mechanics come in, right? Hospital beds, you have care packages, discharge nurses. You're just in a massive whirlwind. There's nothing that can prepare you for this when it's someone you love. What was also complicated is that his metastatic cancer was in his liver and his kidneys were affected, hence the dehydration. So we know once your waterworks is there, then the thinking's not far behind. What isn't talked about enough is that actually such a lovely man, very difficult to care for, always wanted to get out of bed, started to come back, verbalize some really quite haunting things attributed to delirium and agitation. And yet, for the system, this would be described as a good death, right? He died with family at home, family around, and at home in his preferred place of care. And it was, in retrospect, it was a good experience. At the time, bloody awful, right? So I know that there's a movement around the death positives. I'm not positive. It will never be positive. Yeah? But hopefully by the end of this talk, we could get sort of real about it and acknowledge that there is some stuff that we just do need to talk about. The other fortunate thing, it was meant to happen in nice guidelines, in policy by that every area of the UK should have a 24/7 hotline store. And ours in North and Waverley only went live on the 20th of September. And I got a very small, like one line of an email on a trust email. And it was, they feel they're being impacted. I was grateful because I went straight on to my mother-in-law, right, get on the phone. And they were brilliant. Without them being on the phone to help my mother-in-law, wouldn't have actually enabled us to be around at the time when his breathing had changed. So here's one. Who's familiar with Braxton Hicks, right? So most people, when you talk to members of the public, they would have heard of Braxton Hicks. If you ask them if they'd heard about chain-smoking breathing, the prevalence will go right down. And that's going to come to the fore in a slide that I'm going to show in a minute. So this was really fortunate, and also they've never actually had a proper launch. So I'm circulating amongst you now, right? NCH&C on the 24/7 hotline. You don't have to have a referral to phone it, and it's there for the benefit of us. Now, with this 24 care package, 24/7 care, you never know it's coming. You never know when they're going to be there, right? You're always in this state of uncertainty. Varying degrees of support. What was it? Some were really friendly or useless. Others were severe, but got the job done, right? But realistically, when people come into our home, they're the visitors. Just as you're a visitor when you go into hospital. Sometimes that message doesn't circulate. It's because they come in, you just barge in and expect, to dance to their tune. Our father-in-law was in pain a lot. And they used to come around and say, well, no, you can't have any more, which was wrong. We had the syringe drivers kept on not working, causing more pain. And then my mother-in-law had to go around. I didn't know that morphine isn't stocked at all pharmacies. You'll only get access to morphine at certain pharmacies in Norwich if they have it in stock. And it's only the person, like nurses, they're both tied up in morphine. It's down to you to get the drugs in the house for them to apply. Right. All of this was news to us. So this is the message for end-of-life care. We're familiar with this idea of person-centered care, yeah? The unit of care for end-of-life care is broader than the person. Did anyone get to the end of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman? I must confess I did. All right, I tried. But I do sign up to this, all right? The peak end rule. And as humans, his heuristic, his rule of thumb is that if you have an experience, you can call to mind relatively easily what it was like at its peak intensity, but crucially, how it ended. And the study which he uses to sort of like illustrate that is a surgical procedure where half of the group had a spike of pain at the start and kind of mellowed out, versus people had a moderate amount of pain and a spike at the end. When you ask those people who had the same surgical procedure how they felt about it, the people that had the spike of pain at the end, dramatically worse experience. And, I'm a psychologist, and the same applies with the primacy and recency of serial recall. Yeah. You can call to mind what happened more recently a lot easier. And if that's crap, that's what you remember it as. It's fun. So for palliative and end-of-life care, ending really matters. And the dying part is actually quite swift. The time you take to get there can be really, really excruciating. Recognize this one? So, when your family become your research participants, but it's true, you don't know what you need to know until you're going through it. If you're going to try and help reduce trauma in society, prepare people for what's likely to happen. At least, be brave enough to, Catherine Mannix says, we need to change our language about this. Rather than saying, your family member is really poorly, they're sick enough to die. Use the word. That really, it's shocking, but actually that shock can prepare them for something when they feel as like the rug's being pulled from beneath them. We didn't know what questions to ask, and because we didn't know what questions to ask, we didn't know the answer. We didn't get the answers we needed. So that introduces this idea of a societal approach to forming and increasing death literacy. Now, this is a term that the Australians have coined, and I think everyone can implicitly have an understanding about what it's all about. I've worked with this idea of a compassionate communities model for decades, and that's a really hard sell. So I know that one of the reasons why I end up getting a successful NIHR fellowship is because I choose the terms. I use death literacy, and people can understand that. So it's about knowledge and skills to gain access to, understand, and act upon your options. And we do have options. In a similar way, you can choose how you want to have your birth process. You can also, there's elements of choices around your dying process too, but we're not aware of. And the Australians also have come up with what started off with about a 29-item scale. They reduced it down to a 9-item scale. It's, in my opinion, not suitable as an outcome measure, but certainly a useful cross-sectional tool to let's say, gauge what a population is like, and therefore to guide certain interventions afterwards. It's split into 4 knowledge domains: factual knowledge, experiential knowledge, practice, practical knowledge, and community-based knowledge. We'll talk about that in a second. So why is palliative and end-of-life care a public health concern? Because most public health ideally is around prevention, yeah? Now, we're not going to prevent dying, but we can prevent the social comorbidities that go hand in hand with dying. But those are still having remarkable influences on our healthcare system, because these equate to lost work days or school days and turning up to your GP and asking for some form of other assistance. So if you're not dealing with prevention, you can also deal with harm reduction, which is where I feel most of my work lies, is in harm reduction. Making something that's awful slightly less awful. And again, my mentor wrote this book many years ago now, but some people find it hard to sort of compute, if you like, health promoting palliative care. But there is lots of opportunities for health promotion within this longer trajectory towards in that phase approaching the end of life. So these are examples of social comorbidities, obviously not going to be the suicide element of the bottle, but all of them are amenable to prevention and certainly early intervention. It's the same across most of our healthcare systems. Yeah, early intervention. Try to nip it in the bud. So then we'll move on to why us. We're mostly thinking about us as a community, but also why is it important to us particularly now? So this is in the Lancet Commission. This is in healthcare use in the last 12 months. And obviously, we're looking in that last month critically. Also, when it comes to outpatients and GP appointments and overall cost. Now, putting it back into my situation, I know that when my mother-in-law clocked that my father-in-law's breathing had changed, it caused her panic. Thankfully, her first phone call was to us. Yeah, and we explained it. She also got that idea backed up with that specialist advice line. But for everybody else, that is a 999 call. And once you go through the algorithm, transfer to hospital. Yeah. So I look at this last month, and I know that a lot of that spike is attributable to families getting into crisis. And when I say crisis, a crisis of not knowing. Dying is a process like birth. Yeah, we just not clued up on what the signs are. And that is, again, factual-based knowledge. We can facilitate this. So the 95% rule. So if you're living at home with a life-limiting illness, you may come into contact with surgeons up to 5% per any day. I heard that statistic back in about, 15, 20 years ago, something ridiculously long time. And it really struck me. I thought, hold on a second. It's actually the 5% that are holding all the power. So this is the circles of care model. So again, that unit of care is the person with the primary caregivers. And then their inner network typically is between 2 to 5 other people. Those are the people who do lion's share of the care. So as healthcare providers, what are we doing to support the inner network? And sadly, the answer is not very much. Because it's not until you get right into the outer weekends where you actually get services. And at the moment, we don't feel like we have permission. We always feel like we're doing the wrong thing. Oh, is that what they would allow? Well, as I say, so as a community, what do we do to occupy the 95%? Not very much. Compassionate communities is all about that. It's trying to support people to take action to look after their own, to basically occupy that 95% of the tool. But if you look at the rhetoric of an integrated care system, ideally that's what it's all about. I know it's hard that, turning from June to July or something, suddenly the decades of hierarchy working to be the NHS was meant to be squashed, and there was an equal voice between the charitable sector and the healthcare sector. Obviously, that's not necessarily working out so well, but the desire is there. And compassionate communities is actually a vehicle for integrated care. And sometimes on a good day, we have been urged in that direction. On a bad day, we're just forgotten and marginalised. Because it's still the case that people are referred to a palliative care team and you swap train tracks. You're othered. And so this is where my background in engineering and aerospace engineering comes into it. I'm more familiar with complex systems, and I'm grateful in a way that they are seeing healthcare more through that lens. So the size of these cogs are important, because specialist palliative care would be hospitals, hospices. Smallest cog in the system, because fewer of us actually will require specialist intervention when it comes to end of life. There's a link to it further on, but there's a great animation, again through Catherine Mannix. Catherine Mannix she's an angel. She wrote a book in 2018 called With the End in Mind. It's a series of case studies. She's a retired palliative care consultant. And the cartoon that's coming up is called Dying for Beginners. And it just tried to myth bust about what normal dying looks like. And it's not scary. Essentially, you get progressively more tired. And then when someone comes into your room, it may look like you're asleep, but you're actually unconscious. And it's a gentle end for the majority, not for everyone. We've got generous palliative care, so that would be more community-based care. But the crucial next step would be the community involvement. Here, this would be the county council or some kind of civic extension. Public health, obviously, is a county council budget. And if you want to get, and if you're recognised to be in the last year of life, and certainly if you get an accurate prognosis, you're in the last 3 months of life, you can get access to continuing healthcare funding, which would be non-need tested. So that the care packages that I described for my father-in-law are not needs tested because he was 90 to be died. Okay, that's a county council budget. So that is the largest comp. Specialist palliative care, which essentially has all the power and gets most of the money, is the smallest. Now, I talk about this as in like we're not robots because this comes back to research and how we're designing interventions and why we're trying to go for scale and spread. What works here is going to work over there. It just doesn't. Now, if we read the updated guidance for developing and evaluating complex interventions, it's the first time where they really prioritize that you must get a handle on describing context. Now, when it comes to developing approaches, here it's really important to champion the local approach. And how we're going to do it is through active and systematic civic engagement. So I put this into a GIF just because to try and show that it needs to be active. It's not going to happen by itself. And anchor institutions like universities, like county councils, should be seeking, having some form of responsibility in acting in this space. Because ultimately, I mean, it's cheesy, but it's got 100% prevalence. It's all going to happen. Odds on, there's 10% of the workforce that are in this university that are currently going through this. Recently bereaved, long-term caring, it's going on. So therefore, it comes back to social capital. So when we're thinking these cogs, we need to think about what the context is within each cog, also between them. So therefore, we're talking about building social relationships, bridging, and linking within and across. And I talk about the human elements, right? Because we all have good days and bad days. You can't just rely on something that happened yesterday to happen today, especially when we're filling in forms and expecting our research participants to kind of do what we think. And then it comes to NHS policy. So during the pandemic, in a way that was fortuitous, that there was, let's say, end-of-life care was raised in public consciousness. And NHS England was seen to, there was a public outcry. Where's the bereavement support? We'll come on to that in a second too. So this ambitions framework, we actually adopted in Norfolk and Waveney in 2018 because it was first developed from the National Council of Palliative Care in 2050, right? And Professor B. Wee, do you know that name? Well, she was the NHS England lead for palliative and end-of-life care during the pandemic. She needed something, and that ambitions framework was kind of ready to go. So NHS England formally adopted it, and it's live until 2026. Sarah Mitchell, and with the onset of the Labour government, we anticipate maybe there will be an update to it, but for now, this is what we're dealing with. And Norfolk and Waveney ICS is expected to be showing how they are making advances in realising this ambitions framework. And the one that's particularly relevant to my work is number 6. Each community is prepared to help. So I asked the question, what does a community need to feel prepared? And if they felt prepared, what would then give them the impetus to actually step forward and do something? Because there's no money, right? Just point that out, obviously. There's no money in it. And that's when I got this fellowship that's got another 2 years to run. But I heard, thankfully, that they're going to transport it down to St. Christopher's. So hopefully I can continue it. But it's this idea of knowledge mobilization. Honestly, I don't like the term knowledge mobilization. Hot air, right? It's just talking to people. It's about relationships. But getting out of, this idea that the research only happens in a university, that's nonsense. Yeah. And in a way, end-of-life care is something that can unify us because it's going to happen to us all. But this is what the main sort of element, how can we try and improve death literacy across society? And I love Etienne and Bev Wenger. So we use the term communities of practice a lot. And it bugs me that often they're used inappropriately. But a good, decent community of practice that is delivered in the manner as intended has no hierarchy. People are there because they want to be there. And ultimately, for us to have fertile kind of idea of sharing, it needs to be multi-agency, multidisciplinary. And that's why if anyone has experience of MDT meetings, even within the hospital context, it seems to be that more can happen when you get diverse voices in the mix. And this is a recommendation for Braithwaite's paper in the BMJ on culture. And he'll be the first person to talk about how, it's an easy word to describe. I mean, easy word to say. It's very hard to try and show a significant change to culture. But that shouldn't dissuade us. This is the area where we need to be working. We also need to not forget that in my work, where I'm trying to encourage people to do something that naturally they don't want to do, of what the present context is like. So we've got post-pandemic, war in Ukraine and elsewhere, we've got a climate crisis, we've got a cost of living crisis, and the UN described this in their Human Development Report published in 2022 as uncertain times and unsettled lives. So you may detect that's the mood in the camp in the university, in Norwich, in Norfolk, in the UK. It's the same the world over. Yeah, this idea of slight nervousness, uncertainty. And they followed up the UN this year in March, and the follow-up report was entitled Breaking Through the Gridlock, because it's acknowledging that the world over we're stuck. On the one hand, AI is like running ahead like, the genie's out the bottle. Within our ICS, they can't even sign off and like ordering a pen without, bureaucracy going mad. So we've got demands on our care system, we've got resource constraints, complexity of the care system. Digitization isn't necessarily making things easier by any means, as yet. And complexity of care needs. Going back to my father-in-law, God, how many pills? 16, 17 a day. And people, we're not dying of one thing these days. And the complexity of that. I mean, my also interest around adverse effects when it comes to medication, there's absolutely no way that we could get a handle on how these 16 different medications are actually interacting in one person's body. Never mind individual differences. But ultimately, from a UN perspective, what they're calling out for is this idea of collective action. It's natural for humans, when they feel uncertain, to withdraw and put up barriers. And they're saying it's easily done. That's exactly the opposite of what we need to do if we're going to get through this productively together. So I was interested in this idea of collective action, and I went to the work of Elinor Ostrom, who's a Nobel Prize winner political scientist, and she tried to work out what the main tenets of establishing and maintaining collective action. And it's not rocket science. Trust, reciprocity, and reputation. If we're asking people to do something, first question needs to be, what's in it for them? Otherwise, it will never be sustainable. So why now? But think about the urgency. Slightly morbid, but every January, February time, I go onto the Office of National Statistics. This was a seminal paper from the Cicely Saunders Institute down in South London, and looked at the projected number of people dying in England and Wales. So they stopped tracking in 2002. And as you can see, numbers came down and down and down. Why is that? That's the advances in medical science. But as you know, the two certainties of life, death and taxes, there was going to be an uptick, right? And they predicted that would be around that sort of 2008 to 2010 time. So they went on to ONS, and I was shocked by pretty much those predictions are coming true. With a slight difference is that we underestimated by a good 100,000. So, and that's according to book, that goes to 2030, so that's where we are now. So last year, 508,000 people, if we bank on each death affecting 5 people, that's nearly 3 million people experiencing a bereavement in 1 year. Put those sorts of numbers into context, right? And we talk about obesity, we talk about physical activity. You know, the numbers are comparable. And yet, because it's not a particularly glamorous topic to talk about, we just don't. Here's another great study talking about social relationships, predictors of premature mortality. So this is it's in PLOS Mix in 2010. I really encourage you to go and read it because it's had follow-on studies to show that the evidence that they are presenting here is backed up over time. Essentially, hypertension, right? Predictors of early mortality compared to impaired social relationships. Now, I ask the question, when you go and see a GP, they might take your blood pressure. How often do they talk about your social relationships? They're like, right? And yet, they're more of a predictor to your premature mortality than some of the known values around physical activity, alcohol consumption. I haven't got time to unpack that, but please go and have a look at that if you're interested. So then we have research, this idea of a fix-it culture. And obviously when it comes to end-of-life care, we're not going to fix it, but we can make huge moves in making something that's we know to be bad, less bad, through people feeling supported and feeling prepared for what's going to happen. So people may be familiar. Right, can someone help me? Trisha Greenhall, how do you say her surname? Anyone know? Greenhall? Greenhall, all right, we'll go with that for now. Anyway, so she's spoken a lot about this, huge respect for her, despite not necessarily having continuity with her colleagues at Oxford. But unless we can factor in complexity here, we're not making best use of time, resource, anything really. Yes, we're generating papers, but the value in them, I'm somewhat skeptical. And so this idea of unpacking contextual factors, so if we observe a positive result, try and understand what the context was to attribute to that. And Trisha Greenhouse has come up with case study, recommended reporting guidelines for case studies. The more I've got involved in this work, despite the hierarchy of evidence, case studies are way down the bottom. Actually, huge amounts of value in a well-designed, well-reported case study. And this would be my recommended text to explore that in greater detail. So, I've wanted you at least to take away. But essentially, the charter is the implementation framework for compassionate community. And essentially, it asks us to get involved in schools, care homes, and like, they can't pass one, please. A 30-point program. And we would expect that all ICS's county councils are doing something to involve schools or involve places of worship, museums and art galleries. The arts is such an important area to engage both head and heart, all right? And coming back to this idea of the power of story, everybody's got a story to tell. Usually the people who want to tell their story when it comes to end-of-life care have had a particularly awful experience that they wouldn't wish on their worst enemy. But we need to be able to have a platform for those people to tell their story. Alan Kenneher, when he was back in Australia, used to have managed to enroll the equivalent of EDP. And every month there would be a section of someone in the local population's positive story about managing grief. What helped them? Yeah? We don't have anything like that for us at the moment. This is the network that I've led for a while. We're a motley crew. Welcome to join. We meet sometimes online, but we meet all over the county. So West Norfolk, North Norfolk, all over there. Then Where I feel this is important to put it into an umbrella context, are people familiar with the quintuple aim from the Institute of Healthcare Improvement? The NHS has signed up to it. It started off as the triple aim, which was better outcomes, better experience of receiving care, and better use of resources, But then healthcare staff and care staff so what about us? So it turned into the quadruple aim. And when it comes down to, it's listed here as provider satisfaction, I would say providers kind of experience of delivery care. And then it's published in JAMA in 22, the importance of now trying to make healthcare more equitable. And I feel that compassionate communities and palliative and end-of-life care can actually have something to say on each of those elements. So to have sharper elbows to get a seat at the table. Have to be keep my eye on politics in this field. In 2018, I know it seems a long time ago when I'm about to say this name, but Boris Johnson re-allocated 250 million for hospices. We've got a new hospice that's just opened, but back in 2018, we had the West Norfolk Hospice Tapping House. We had one on Coleman Road, which was an NCH&C NHS-funded hospice, and we have, that's it really. And if you looked at it, the prevalence data, again published around 2018, we had the highest prevalence of death in care homes in relation to hospices because we didn't have any hospices. So with that repurposed money, we got to bid for some of it. And I got small amounts to stage what we called a citizen-led community in practice. And it happened all over COVID times. So we couldn't meet face-to-face. Our best partner was the local forest school. And it was actually a lot of fun. We used to meet out in the woods and cook our tea on the fire. People used to bring food and share it. So we had, this lady was a dramatist, this chap from Suffolk Council. We had a CEO of the Pear Tree Centre down in Halesworth and other people from Suffolk Councils. Thankfully, we all came together. We decided some things which we mutually sort of decided would be a good idea, and then we just let it take care of itself, really. So it was very much that all of the initiatives were essentially designed and owned by the people delivering it. So yeah, local charities, schools, funeral homes, faith groups, a motley crew. And it all started, the best workshop I've ever taken happened in the first few months of lockdown, initiated by Cormac Russell and a chap over in Canada called Peter Pooler. It was called Together Apart. And the workshop they enabled people to learn from was called The Art of Invitation. And I'd really encourage anyone that's thinking about doing some kind of community work to really think hard about designing your invitation. Because at the moment, we just say, this is happening, come to this place and expecting that's it. But ideally, you need to describe the experience that people are going to have. And crucially, say what the expectations of them are, of you as the convener. So if you choose to join us, we ask of you, have it on the invitation. Yeah, make it crystal clear. We did a series of community asset walks, so this is the invitation. Do you know what's around the corner? It was obviously meant to have a double play of words. And we generated, rather than a community asset map, this is up at Donna Hall, working a Wigan deal. No one talks about asset maps. So we called it a treasure map. And there are some lovely details. For example, a lot of the pubs on there, all the staff are dementia-friendly trained. You can phone the pet shop and they'd organise your dog walking and they'd deliver your pet food. The local photocopy shop, they would come to us, we'd organise your memory boxes. You wouldn't necessarily think about these things that are around the corner, but they could actually helpful in your sort of responsibilities as a carer. We had the local fuel home publish a book, Cooking for One. So we got a small grant, we got halogen hogs into the Pear Tree. I'm a trustee down at the Pear Tree in Halesworth. Essentially, it's like a hospice without any beds. It's headquartered, it's complementary therapy, etc. So we invited people recently bereaved to come in and cook recipes out of the cookbook. And that's still going to this day, actually. Really well received. Paid the men's shed 50 quid. To make me 150 wooden hearts, and for 1 year I had all 4 kids in the same primary school So with the help of my wife and the Parent-Teacher Association, all kids at the primary school got little wooden hearts to decorate with their idea of loss. And put them up on the school gates, asked parents what their sort of opinions were, and ultimately we did find out that conversations were had around the dinner table. This is not massive changes. This is kind of nudge approaches. But when we think about public health interventions, it was news to me that if you get something affecting 10 people in 100, you've done a good thing. So to also bear in mind the scale of stuff, of change that we're trying to prompt. Yeah, that's my daughter. And that was a drone picture from the primary school. We did some community memorial events. Advanced care planning is a big theme of today, and hopefully by the end of today, I'm going to give you some clues on how you can be kinder to your family by thinking about some kind of future care plan. We wanted to try and demystify some of this, to enable people around Halesworth to have the opportunity to generate advanced care plans. I must apologise, that clock has stopped, so I will speed up. But I presented to the Royal College of General Practice with a GP from Suffolk, and the title of our talk was How to Get a Death Conversation in 10 Minutes. We were remarkably well attended. Only in the first 30 seconds for us to say, spoiler alert, we don't believe you can. Yeah. So again, it makes sense to have a lot of these conversations and a lot of these ideas warmed up. So by the time you get in front of a GP, who these days has to sign you a respect form, which is our local approach to a do not resuscitate order, but it also has some other elements of care on the sidelines too. It makes sense for us to work out in the community. So by the time you come into that clinical consultation, it's more about initiating an advanced care plan rather than fact-finding it. We're down in Halesworth again. There's a small play festival, and there's a link there. It's called You'll Be Fine. It was award-winning. It was written by Jan Etherington, who's written for the BBC. She's a wonderful playwright. I encourage you to go and have this. Most significant change. So we found out about a gentleman that was dying. I don't know if it was in Norfolk or Norwich. It might have been in Ipswich Hospital, who wanted to die at home. The discharge team went out to his rural Suffolk cottage, only to come back and say the electrics are shot. The plumbing and the electrics won't take the installation of a hospital bed. As a consequence, this was labelled a failed discharge. We got to find out about it in our sort of community of practice. We mobilised an electrician and a plumber the same day. They knew what it was about. They took a nominal fee. Jobs were done. We phoned up the discharge team that says, can you go back and reassess? Long and short it was, one day later, the gentleman was discharged home, and he died there safely with his wife a few days later after that. Our message to that was, it's unrealistic for a plumber and an electrician to be on a discharge nurse's call sheet. But you could phone us, right? And when I say us, similarities of other, public bodies closer to, but we don't have those at the time. So, who has a mortgage? Most people. Who has a lasting power of return? Fewer people. All right. Sadly, I've had many experiences of hearing reports of how badly things go wrong. Just because you have a shared bank account doesn't necessarily mean that you can get your bills paid. Trust me, it's a simple process. You don't have to pay for it. It's on the government website, but without it, oh my God, a bad situation can be made so much worse. Because at the time, you've got emotions, right? You've got stress. Usually, if you haven't thought about an LPA, it will be a surprise if it's needed. So let me ask a different one. Who's got house insurance? Nearly everyone, right? If you go abroad, you get travel insurance. Yeah, loads. So put it in perspective. In this way, we're valuing, I know, just being provocative, we're valuing our stereo more than we are the people sitting next to us. Made a will? Yeah? Hope so. Right. Now, the best way I described this was my mentor, the mentor. And she thinks, I mean, if you come across family members that say, oh, I don't want to talk about that, that's morbid. So did my mum's, this case. Where she says, if you can label it as an act of love, all right? You say, look, mum, you care for me, right? I was hedging my bets, but she did say, yes, you know. And so, well, the thing is that if you're non-communicative, the doctors are going to ask me what you want. And I genuinely don't know. Can we sit down, have a glass of wine and just bash this out? And we did. And once it was done, like literally felt like a weight off. But again, speaking as a butterfly, when you're seeing people who've had, let's say, a sudden accident, and family are left with the question, is that what they would have wanted? So I come back to that Daniel Kahneman, endings matter. Those are the thoughts that stay with you. So brief. Here's a link to generate an online future care plan. This is a public health textbook. We don't have access to that in our library, which is a shame because it's brilliant. Here's a nice book. Hope for the best, plan for the rest. I think that's what we can describe, sums up today, hopefully. There's a link to Catherine Mannix's cartoon, Dying for Beginners. And by the way, did anyone get a chance to listen to that Radio 4? It was very recent, Simon Boris. Oh. So he died of, I think it was throat cancer. He worked for the Jersey EV Coast or something, but he worked as humanitarian aid. You can still listen to his 10-minute interview. That book was published on Friday. I've got it in my bag. He such a positive outlook about how to face the end. But obviously, he had the luxury, knew it was coming, but a wonderful, wonderful man and a book. And here is something from Age UK, a really, really useful kind of framing to try and get your house in order. So, what is the role of a civic university? I'd encourage you. What is our bereavement policy? I can say firsthand, it's shocking, right? I've had 4 lots of paternity leave at the drop of a hat. I said to them, my dad's just died. All right, you've got 5 days, I'll see you Monday. Right, that was 18 months ago, and I still haven't got probate. At the time, was I in a fit state to work? Yeah, I turned up. Was my head in the game? No. Did I begrudge UEA? Yes. Right? Civic university, my tail. Right. So also considering about people living in longer periods in ill health. What are we thinking about staff who have long-term care responsibilities? And equally, for FMH, what are we doing to support death literacy? Dying is not failure, right? I know we're a faculty of medicine, but we also need to factor that into. So yeah, I also read that last few weeks, and there seemed to be a lot of overlap between Aldous Huxley's Minor Birds of Attention. Has anyone read this book? Oh, okay. Basically, throughout the day, the minor birds just call out attention, here and now. So I guess it's his message for mindfulness decades before it became today. Okay, thank you. Oh yeah. I'm really happy. This is the £6 million extension to the hospice, and it's all about research and development. It's a major organisation. Cicely Saunders' first hospice. Please come down, say hello. Help to see.